Somewhere in the Utah desert, a 240-mile race is underway. Runners start hallucinating. Their muscles have nothing left. They've been awake for 2 days, sometimes 3. Most of them quit. Not because their legs give out, because their brain refuses to keep going. Then there's Courtney Dauwalter. Same course, same sleep deprivation, same physical wreckage. But she doesn't fight it. She has a name for the moment everyone else tries to escape. She calls it the pain cave. And instead of running from it, she runs into it. She takes naps, 90 seconds exactly. Then she gets back up. She keeps a pace so steady it looks robotic. For days. She's beaten the entire field, men and women, by hours. Not because she's superhuman, because she understood something about fatigue that almost everyone else gets wrong. Here's the uncomfortable part. What makes her consistent isn't more willpower than you have. It's that she stopped relying on willpower at all. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to do the same thing, with actual neuroscience to back it up. Let's clear up a mistake almost everyone makes. We use motivation, willpower, discipline, and consistency like they're interchangeable. They're not. Confusing them is probably the biggest reason your routines collapse the moment you're exhausted. Motivation is an emotion. It's a mood. It rises and falls with your sleep, your stress, even the weather. If your plan depends on feeling motivated, you've built your life on the least stable foundation available. Willpower used to be described as a fuel tank, something you burn through all day until it's empty. That idea has taken a serious hit from recent research. We'll get into why in a minute. Here's the short version. What feels like running out of willpower isn't your brain running out of gas. It's your brain doing a cost-benefit calculation and deciding the task isn't worth the effort right now. Discipline is different again. It's a trained system, a skill you build. The decision to act doesn't depend on how you feel in the moment. Consistency. Consistency is the result of all of this working together. A stabilized routine that doesn't depend on motivation, doesn't drain your willpower, runs almost automatically. It's not a personality trait. It's an engineering outcome. There's one more trap hiding in here, and it's sneaky. Perfectionism. Perfectionism tells you that if you can't do the full version of a habit, you shouldn't do it at all. Behavioral science is blunt about this one. Perfectionism is one of the primary drivers of people abandoning habits completely. Consistency says the opposite. A scaled-down version done today beats a perfect version you skip. So why does this matter so much? Because the moment you're exhausted, every one of these systems behaves differently. Motivation evaporates. Willpower, or what we thought was willpower, feels depleted. But consistency, if it's built correctly, barely notices. Which raises the real question. What is fatigue actually doing to your brain that makes all of this fall apart? Fatigue isn't one thing. That's part of why it's so hard to fight. You can't use the same tool against 5 different problems. There's physical fatigue. Your muscles and nervous system are depleted. Your brain starts treating basic movement as too expensive to justify. There's mental fatigue, caused by sustained concentration. It directly impairs your focus and your ability to resist distraction. There's emotional fatigue. It comes from prolonged stress or emotional labor. It makes you start resenting responsibilities you used to handle fine. There's decision fatigue. After enough choices in a day, your brain defaults to whatever's easiest, not whatever's best. And there's cognitive overload. Too much information to process. Your brain abandons structured plans in favor of autopilot. Here's why this matters more than it sounds. These 5 types of fatigue don't take turns. They stack. By 9 p.m., when you're telling yourself you should go to the gym or open your laptop, you're not fighting one weakened system. You're fighting all 5 at once. And every one of them is working against the same target. The part of your brain responsible for overriding impulses in favor of long-term goals. So what's actually happening inside your skull when that override system fails? The answer is stranger and more useful than you're just tired. Here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. Researchers using EEG have found something strange. During long periods of demanding mental effort, the front of your brain starts showing slow wave activity, the kind that looks almost identical to sleep. Your eyes are open, you're awake, but part of your brain has effectively gone offline. At the same time, theta waves climb in the front of your brain. That's the signature of a brain working harder and harder for worse and worse results. The brain waves tied to sharp, engaged thinking start dropping off. Your stress hormone, cortisol, rises. That's linked directly to worse attention, worse memory, worse impulse control. Your dopamine circuits, the ones responsible for your drive to start things, get disrupted too. Put it all together. You get a brain that is quite literally shutting down the exact system you need to push through a task. But here's the twist. It should change how you think about fatigue forever. Scientists used to believe willpower was a fuel tank, a finite resource that physically runs dry, the same way your legs run out of glycogen. Major replication studies have seriously undercut that theory. What's replaced it is something called the opportunity cost model. Under this model, fatigue isn't your brain running out of fuel. It's your brain running a constant background calculation. Is it worth spending more effort here? Or would your energy be better spent resting or doing something easier and more rewarding? When you're tired, that calculation tips. The cost of focusing feels higher. The payoff of your long-term goal feels smaller, farther away. So your brain, completely rationally from its own point of view, downshifts. It falls back on autopilot. And here's the single most important sentence in this entire video. If your autopilot habits are unproductive, consistency breaks. But if you deliberately designed your autopilot habits in advance, consistency survives. Even when you're running on fumes, your brain isn't betraying you when you're tired. It's just defaulting to whatever's already wired in. So the real question isn't, how do I get more willpower? It's, what have I actually wired in? Before we get to that, let's see exactly how big this problem really is, because the numbers are not small. According to the National Safety Council, around 69% of the workforce regularly experiences fatigue on the job, and in more recent data, 97% of fatigued workers show measurably reduced cognitive performance. That's not a small dip. Fatigued workers lose productivity due to lost focus at more than double the rate of well-rested workers. The financial side is staggering too. One analysis estimated fatigue-related productivity loss at around $2,000 per employee per year. Scaled up to a Fortune 500-sized workforce, that's roughly $198 million annually. For one company, here's a stat that should reframe how you think about showing up. Presenteeism, being physically at work but mentally checked out, accounts for 84% of the total cost of lost productivity in major studies. Not people calling in sick, people sitting at their desks exhausted, going through the motions. Let's put cognitive impairment from fatigue in terms your brain can actually feel. 17 hours awake produces impairment roughly equal to a blood alcohol level of 0.05. 21 hours awake, and you're at roughly 0.08. The legal driving limit in most places, 24 hours awake and you're functioning like someone at 0.10. You wouldn't trust yourself behind the wheel in that state. So why would you trust yourself to make disciplined, willpower-driven decisions in that same state? This is where most advice fails you. It tells you to just push through. But if pushing through worked, these numbers wouldn't exist. So let's look at what actually does work. Starting with proof from people whose entire lives depend on getting this right. Let's go back to real evidence. This isn't theoretical. Anesthesiology residents were studied in a randomized clinical trial. Brutal hospital shifts, chronic sleep deprivation, Almost no personal time. One group set normal study goals. The other group used a different framework. They identified their wish, imagined the outcome, named their actual obstacle, fatigue, then built a specific if-then plan. Something like, if I feel too exhausted to read when I get home, then I will open my tablet and review exactly one clinical algorithm. The results weren't subtle. The planning group studied a median of 3 hours. The control group 5 hours. Their odds of consistently hitting weekly study goals were over 3 times higher. And while the control group's satisfaction with their own time management collapsed under the pressure of the rotation, the planning group's satisfaction stayed stable. The same pattern showed up in university biology students. The ones who simply set a goal to be less distracted failed consistently. The ones who built a specific plan, if I feel too tired to study and my phone buzzes, then I put it in a drawer and read one page, actually followed through. And remember Courtney Dauwalter? Those 90-second naps aren't random. They're a deliberate pre-planned system, built to reset her cognitive function without breaking her pace. She's not relying on raw grit at mile 200. She built a structure that runs without grit. Notice the pattern across all 3 examples. Exhausted doctors, exhausted students, an exhausted ultra runner. None of them succeeded by trying harder in the moment. They all succeeded by deciding in advance exactly what they do when exhaustion hit. So if pre-deciding is the key, what does that actually look like when you sit down to build it for your own life? That's where it gets practical. The 4 methods that actually work. Method 1. Shrink the behavior until motivation doesn't matter. Researchers use a model. Behavior equals motivation times ability times prompt. Motivation will be low when you're tired. That's a given. So the only lever left is ability. Make the behavior so easy it requires almost no motivation to execute. Not write the chapter. Write one sentence. Not study for an hour. Read one flashcard. The point isn't the output. The point is the behavior fires when prompted. That keeps the neural pathway alive. A writer who writes one sentence on their worst day is still, by definition, a writer who wrote today. Method 2. Redesign your environment so the disciplined choice is also the easiest choice. Your exhausted brain doesn't choose based on what's good for you long term. It chooses based on what's right in front of it, whatever has the least friction. So you engineer that in advance. Running shoes by the door, not in the closet. Study materials were open on the desk the night before. Distracting apps blocked before the urge even hits. When the environment does the deciding, your tired brain doesn't have to. Method 3. Stop chasing outcomes and start reinforcing identity. I need to lose 10 pounds is a goal. It requires motivation every single day to re-justify itself. I am someone who trains is an identity. Your brain works hard to keep your actions consistent with how it sees itself, almost as a matter of internal coherence. When the habit becomes proof of who you are, instead of a means to an end, it survives fatigue far better. Skipping it doesn't just cost you progress, it creates friction with your self-concept. Method 4. Pre-write the if-then plan before you're tired enough to need it. This is the single most validated tool in the entire research base, backed by hundreds of studies. The format is simple. If, specific obstacle, then specific action. Not, I'll try to work out even when I'm tired. That's a wish, and wishes dissolve under fatigue. Instead, if I get home and feel too drained to cook, then I will eat the pre-made meal in the fridge instead of ordering delivery. The plan removes the decision entirely. Your tired brain doesn't decide anything. It just executes a script you already wrote, back when you had the energy to think clearly. 4 methods. All of them share one thing. None of them ask your tired brain to do anything hard in the moment. They do the hard thinking in advance, while you still can. Now here's where it gets interesting. Some of what you've been told about willpower and fatigue is actually backwards. For over a decade, there's been a famous study used to prove that tired, decision-fatigued brains default to harsh, lazy judgments. It's the parole judges study. Judges granted parole around 65% of the time at the start of a session. That dropped to nearly 0 right before a meal break, then bounced back to 65% right after eating. It became the go-to example of decision fatigue in psychology classrooms everywhere. Except, later, more careful analysis found something the original study missed. Favorable rulings simply took longer to write than denials. So what were judges actually doing before a break? Not getting depleted and turning cruel. They were doing time management, scheduling the quick, simple cases right before their break, so they wouldn't start a long, complex hearing right when they needed to stop. The hungry judge effect was substantially driven by scheduling logistics, not a biological collapse of the brain. Why does this matter to you? It's a perfect example of how the popular version of fatigue makes you worse overstates the biological story and understates how strategic human behavior actually is under pressure. Your brain isn't as fragile as the popular narrative suggests, but it is shaped by structure, scheduling, and design, far more than by raw mental toughness. Here's the second counterintuitive truth. It might be the most important one in this whole video. Consistency itself protects you from fatigue. In comparative studies, people who maintained highly consistent daily routines, very little day-to-day variance, completed almost 30% more tasks than people with erratic routines. Here's the kicker. Their reported cognitive fatigue was less than half that of the erratic group. Read that again. Being consistent doesn't drain you more. It drains you less. Once a behavior is automated, your brain executes it without burning through the expensive, limited resource of conscious decision-making. Inconsistency is what's exhausting. Every day becomes a fresh negotiation with yourself about whether today's the day you'll follow through. And the third counterintuitive truth is the one that's going to sting a little. The thing you think is resting your tired brain often isn't resting it at all. When you're mentally fatigued, the instinct is to scroll. Open the phone. Open social media. Let your brain switch off for a bit. It feels like rest. It is not rest. Every post, image, and notification triggers a tiny decision. Keep scrolling. Tap. Like skip. Your brain processes hundreds of these micro decisions in a single session. That keeps the exact brainwave patterns tied to cognitive load elevated, while suppressing the calmer brainwave activity tied to real recovery. You're not resting your prefrontal cortex. You're feeding it a continuous stream of low-stakes decisions that keep it working. Real recovery requires something almost boring by comparison. Low arousal states, no evaluation required, a short walk with nothing to judge, a brief nap, slow breathing, nothing to swipe past, nothing to react to. This connects directly to 2 mistakes that quietly sabotage almost everyone trying to build consistency. The first mistake, treating fatigue as a moral failing, telling yourself you're lazy or weak for not pushing through, trying to force discipline through sheer will. We already know what this does neurologically. It pushes your prefrontal cortex into that sleep-like, degraded state. That makes performance worse, not better. It often ends in irritability and total behavioral collapse. The fix isn't more force. It's redesigning the environment, so force is never required in the first place. The second mistake, the all-or-nothing trap. Skipping the full workout because you can't do the full hour. Skipping the full study session because you can't focus for 2 hours straight. This is exactly backwards. Task abandonment is strongly linked to rigid expectations that don't bend to your actual energy on a given day. The fix is habit scaling. When you're exhausted, you don't cancel the habit. You shrink it. A 2-minute walk instead of a 60-minute workout. One sentence instead of a chapter. The scaled down version keeps the pathway alive. The canceled version lets it die. The third mistake, which we just covered, is mistaking digital scrolling for recovery. It feels passive. It isn't. 3 mistakes. All 3 share the same root cause. Trying to solve a structural problem, your depleted prefrontal cortex with willpower, when the actual fix is structural too. So if everything points toward designing systems instead of fighting fatigue directly, what does the complete system actually look like? Pulled together, there are 3 major frameworks behind almost everything we've covered. The Tiny Habits method from Stanford's B.J. Fogg is built on that formula from earlier. Behavior, motivation, ability, prompt. It's designed to make the starting friction of a habit as close to 0 as possible. The Atomic Habits system from James Clear focuses on 4 laws. Make it obvious, attractive, easy, satisfying. Heavy emphasis on identity and environment design. The WHOOP method, wish, outcome, obstacle, plan from researchers at NYU is built specifically to close the gap between intending to do something and actually doing it. By forcing you to name your obstacle and build the if-then plan in advance. Different names, different academics, same underlying truth. None of these frameworks ask you to be stronger. They ask you to be more prepared. Which brings us to 4 rules you can use starting today. Rule 1. Pick a single non-negotiable habit. Shrink it to its smallest possible version. 1 page, 2 push-ups, 1 sentence. Anchor it to something you already do automatically, like brushing your teeth. Do the tiny version every day, no exceptions, regardless of how tired you are. Rule 2. Restructure your environment so the behavior you want is the easiest option available. Make the behaviors you don't want require extra effort to access. Decide this in advance while you have the energy to think clearly, not in the moment when you don't. Rule 3. Write your if-then plan before you need it. Name the specific obstacle you expect. I'll feel too tired after work. Pair it with a specific, pre-decided action. Let the plan make the decision, so your exhausted brain never has to. Rule 4. When energy is low, scale the behavior down instead of skipping it entirely. A 5-minute version of the habit is not a failure. It's the entire point. Courtney Dauwalter doesn't win 200-mile races because she has more willpower than the people who drop out. She wins because she removed willpower from the equation almost completely. The 90-second naps, the mental reframing of pain as a place to explore rather than a signal to stop. None of that is grit in the moment. It's a system built in advance that runs even when she's not capable of thinking clearly. You don't need more discipline. You need a better designed autopilot. And now you actually know how to build one. So you built a system that keeps you consistent even when you're exhausted. But here's the problem that quietly undoes all of it. Most people are recovering completely wrong. We touched on it briefly. The scrolling that feels like rest but isn't. If your recovery is secretly keeping your brain just as overloaded as your workday, you're going to stay exhausted. No matter how well designed your habits are, you'll be consistent and burnt out at the same time, which is its own kind of trap. That's exactly what the next video breaks down. Why the way most people rest is making their fatigue worse, and what actual cognitive recovery looks like instead. Why scrolling your phone doesn't actually rest your brain, the recovery myth. All titles. You're not resting, you're just switching tasks. The science of real recovery. Why your brain never actually switches off. Why you're exhausted, even after resting all weekend.